Hey guys, welcome back. So I have another book review for you today, but I'm going to just tell you a little bit about what I'm going to do this month. This is the first Tuesday of Black History Month, and this month I'm going to read either books by Black authors or books about the Black experience. So this week I have started The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, and I gave this book 4 stars. So this book is about government segregation and how the government backed up segregation. We're kind of talking from the early 1900s all the way until the civil rights movement, but even kind of beyond that. And this book talks about different laws and different contracts by homeowners associations and things like that that made sure that neighborhoods weren't integrated, and that made sure housing projects, like government funded housing projects, Section 8, wasn't integrated in a lot of places for a very long time. And this book is really informative. It packs so much information into 12 chapters, and it's talking about homeowners associations, but also New Deal programs and post and pre and during World War II programs, and there's just so much stuff that's going on, and it's a lot to take in. It's a really big chunk of information, and I thought that was really good. I always like to learn, and I feel like every day you're learning something, so I felt like this book was really good at teaching you things like that, but also just sort of teaching you about something that we don't always think about. And I will say this book is also infuriating. I was extremely angry at some points because we were talking about police officers and stuff literally standing by or even participating in mobs where neighborhoods were being integrated while people's houses were being firebombed. It was so upsetting. It's so very frustrating. And that's a part of American history that we need to remember. It's a part of American history that doesn't need to be forgotten, because when you just forget about the past, it can happen again in the present. And I'm a firm believer in that you should always remember the past, because if not, you're going to repeat it. And this was, it's hard to read. It's a difficult read because you're reading a lot of different things that are in newspapers. You're seeing flyers, you're reading things that are written into contracts, you're seeing what city leaders, senators, representatives, mayors, all kinds of people are saying, and you're just what? And it can be, it's frustrating. It's very frustrating. And I saw that this book came out, I think last year, but I wanted to read it, it's been on my TBR for a while, and I decided to save it. This year I decided I was going to read it this year. I decided I was going to read it in February because I wanted to do February all about the same thing. And guys, it's sad. It's a good book. It's a good book to read, but it's so sad and it's so frustrating. And it even talks about how today a lot of suburbs, so outside of cities, that refused integration back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, they are not integrated today. They are still not integrated. And it's are you kidding? It's so difficult for me to imagine that places aren't integrated, but I understand, especially in reading this, I understand how that's happened, but it's still extremely frustrating. So we kind of talk about the entire country in this, but the focus I think is on certain places. So California had a large influx of African American workers to work on the war effort during World War II, and a lot of those neighborhoods became extremely segregated, especially after the war housing and all that was torn down, because they tore it all down. And it was very difficult. There's one man that we read about, and he got a carpool together, and for 20 years he drove 100-mile round trip with his carpool to work until he retired from Ford. 20 years, 100 miles, because he could never buy a house in the subdivision beside where he worked. And it's so frustrating. But anyway, so we talk about California, but we also talk about places like New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit. We mentioned Dallas a bit, I think, and then New Orleans just a little bit of Texas in general, because LBJ was able to get projects for African Americans into Texas, but they weren't great projects, so I wouldn't applaud that for LBJ. But Yeah, so we talk about a lot of different cities. I noticed it wasn't heavily focused on the South. It was more, I thought, like Northwest and Midwest. But it still gave you a pretty comprehensive view of what was going on in the country during this huge span of time. Like, we're talking early 1900s, honestly, 1870s during Reconstruction until, the 1970s. We're talking a 100-year span of time almost that systematic racism was a thing in the United States, and it was government sponsored. And it's so very frustrating, but like, we know that now, which means that we should be taking steps to fix that problem. It means that it is not a problem that should still be happening because we know it. Like, we know that this happened, we know that it was wrong, we need to take steps to fix it. And this book does like a really good job of explaining the issues and giving you a little bit of a personal look into people's lives and to what was happening. Like, and we're talking like you're getting like doctors and stuff whose houses are being firebombed, or you're having like a white person who bought a house and then like sold or leased it to a black person, and now they're both in jail. It's absolutely insane just what all was going on. And I think that, especially in this time, we've all heard a little bit about it. I don't think that there's a way to not. But when you're just like reading just 12 continuous chapters, and it's not even scratching the surface, it's so sad, and it's something that should have never happened. So, like, I do suggest reading this book, especially if you feel like you could be more informed. I feel like we could all be more informed, so I feel like it's a book that everyone can read. It's not it's not super graphically violent or anything. They do talk about like houses being firebombed or like people dying, but it's not graphic. We don't really hear like this happened to this, we just hear like the house was firebombed or whatever. But you see pictures of people, you get a lot of quotes and everything from the government, which I think is important, but also just like so like anger inducing. At least for me, I found myself being like extremely frustrated. Sometimes I wanted to stop reading because I was like, I'm so like angry, I'm so upset, I don't even want to read this anymore. But I did continue, and like I said, I do definitely suggest it. I got this from my library on Overdrive, so it was free, but I do know that you can get it on Kindle, and it's on iBooks, and of course you can get it from your library or a bookstore. I just saw that it was on Thrift Books for like $15 just now when I Googled it. So it is widely available. You can definitely get your hands on it, and I definitely think that you should. I think that it is important for all of us to know all of the things that happened in the past that kind of lead up to what is going on with us today. And this also talks a lot about like the real estate market and about like redlining, which is something that like Louisville, Kentucky is still having a huge problem with, is like redlining and how it's affected like the present day Louisville. A lot of cities are like that, but I just recently listened to a podcast about Louisville, which is why I brought it up. But it talks about real estate agents, talks about like HOAs. It talks about how people are needed for the war effort, but then like they can't be, like they can't live. Like it's extremely frustrating. But yes, I do recommend it because you should be frustrated. If you're learning something and you're learning something that was horrible, I think that you should feel frustration. I think you should feel some anger. I think that you should feel like you want to make a change. So I strongly suggest reading a book or books like this. I strongly suggest reading this book or books like this because it's going to help you grow as a person. It's going to help you become a more informed citizen, and it's going to help you make sure that you don't make the same mistakes that people made years ago and that people are still making today. So, like I said, read this book, read books like it. That is all that I have for you guys today, and I'll see you next week. Bye.